showstopper of a dessert, my blackberry white chocolate charlotte. Now this has pistachio ladyfingers on the outside of it, and that's exactly what I'm going to start with before I can get into its green fillings. I start with shelled unsalted pistachios. I need half a cup. But I can't grind the pistachios all on their own, or I end up with pistachio butter. So I add all of my dry ingredients to the food processor, including a cup of all-purpose flour. I do need some cornstarch, 2 tablespoons, and half a teaspoon of baking powder. Now I'll pulse this all together until the pistachios are finely ground. I'll set this aside while I work on the sponge portion. I've got 5 egg whites here in my mixer, and I'm going to whip these to a soft peak while I add 3 tablespoons of sugar. I'll just transfer this to another bowl so then I can focus on the milk. I have my 5 yolks from the egg whites I separated, and I'm going to add to that half a cup of sugar. And just like the whites, I do this on high speed. Now this I'll whip until it's thick and doubled in volume and holds a ribbon when the beaters are lifted. There we go. Thick and pale buttered yellow. When I lift the beaters, you can see that ribbon on top of the eggs, so I know I've whipped them enough. Now I fold my whites into my yolks in 2 additions. You don't have to be too gentle with these. And the last addition. Now it's time to fold in the dry ingredients. You can really start to see that pale green color of the pistachio coming through. I've prepared my trays for piping my base and the ladyfinger sides to the charlotte. I've got an 8.5-inch circle traced, and for my ladyfingers, I've drawn parallel lines. After all, piping is kind of like coloring inside the lines. When you're piping, you might find it's tempting to hold the piping tip too close to the parchment paper. But actually, it's better if you hold it a good inch away. Let the batter guide you along. For the ladyfingers, I just pipe from one line to the other. You want to leave a fair bit of space in between because the batter will expand as it bakes. To assemble the charlotte, you need at least 18 ladyfingers. This recipe makes a couple extra. You never know if one might break or not look perfect. All right. My ladyfingers and my charlotte base are ready for the oven. I've preheated it to 325, and these take hardly any time at all. For the ladyfingers, it takes 9 to 11 minutes, and the base I leave in for an extra 2 minutes. I love how quickly this pistachio sponge bakes off. Now I let this go an extra 2 minutes just because it's a bigger cake layer. That's the base for my charlotte. And I've already pulled out my ladyfingers. I'll let those cool. And to make this elaborate charlotte with cream filling, I have not just 1, but 2 layers. First, a blackberry Bavarian, and on top, a white chocolate mousse. I'll start by blooming my gelatin in cool water. I need 2 tablespoons of plain gelatin powder, and I'm adding that to 1/3 of a cup of cool water. My Blackberry Bavarian is very much like a fruit mousse. I use gelatin to set it, and the base is actually a creme anglaise. I have half a cup of milk here, and I'll add to that 1/3 of a cup of sugar. I'll heat that on medium, and I'll add my vanilla. While that's heating, I can separate my 3 eggs. I just need the yolks here. Now I add 1/3 of a cup of sugar to the egg yolks. Normally when I make a creme anglaise, I add all of my sugar to the egg yolk mixture. But because I have to add enough sugar to sweeten the whole Bavarian with the added blackberry puree and whipped cream, it's a bit too much for this amount of egg yolk. Half the sugar goes in the milk and half the sugar goes in the yolks. 2/3 of a cup in total. My milk is nice and hot. Just bring it over and I'll slowly add it to my eggs while I'm whisking. Once you add a little bit, then you can add the rest all at once. And I'll return this all to my pot. And back on medium heat, I'm going to cook it just for a couple minutes to thicken the egg yolks. You can see how my creme anglaise has thickened, and you can even feel it pull when you stir it. So I'll take it off the heat, and then adding my bloomed gelatin will dissolve the gelatin and cool the custard down. Just give that a quick stir, let it melt in for a second. Perfect. So move right into my white chocolate mousse. Now I need a little gelatin for this too, not as much as the Bavarian, just a teaspoon. And I'm adding that to half a cup of cold milk. And I'll just let that sit while I melt my 12 ounces of white chocolate. Yes, you heard that right. This is a rich white chocolate mousse. 12 ounces of couverture or baking white chocolate. Here we go. My white chocolate is nice and smooth. Now that's the perfect amount of time for the gelatin to soften in my milk. Can't see the gelatin anymore, so I know it's dissolved in there. And I'll add this to my white chocolate. I'm going to grab a whisk. There we go. So I have my white chocolate mousse base cooling. I have my blackberry Bavarian base cooling. I've got my pistachio ladyfingers in base cooling. Before you know it, it'll be time to bring this beautiful charlotte all together.
Whether you want to take your
Pulling together and assembling my blackberry white chocolate charlotte. So first, I want to get the beautiful cake base and ladyfingers inside my pan. So to shape my charlotte, I use a springform pan. That way I can release it. Then I put a base, just a cardboard base on the bottom, peel away the parchment, and I drop this into the center. Now I do a little test just to see how high I want my charlotte. You do want to trim off one end of the ladyfinger, that way it sits flat inside the pan. When you're arranging your ladyfingers, make sure they're very close together. After all, they have to hold in the blackberry Bavarian and white chocolate mousse. Before I put my fillings in, I like to brush the cake base and the inside of the ladyfingers, the flat side, with a simple syrup. It's equal parts sugar and water, just cooked together until the sugars dissolve. I have my two bases that have cooled to just above room temperature. And I've got my cream already whipped. You need 1 1/4 cups of fluid whipping cream whipped for each filling. So I've just done it in one batch. I'll simply divide it in half. I'm starting with a blackberry Bavarian. I'll add half of the whipped cream. It will liquefy a little bit. You do want to work relatively quickly because the cold will start setting the gelatin. Now I'm ready for the blackberry. 3/4 of a cup of blackberry puree, along with 2 tablespoons of fresh lime juice. I love the floral intensity of fresh blackberries. Now I pour this directly into my pan. Now it's time for my white chocolate mousse. Put this into a bigger bowl so I can fold in the cream, and that's all that has to be done. This needs time to chill. Give it at least 5 hours. After it's chilled, it's ready to be revealed. Go, transfer it onto your serving platter. When I serve a dessert like this to a crowd and you can't see every element inside, you don't actually know that there's pistachio or blackberry in there, so I use those as my decoration items. Create a crown of fresh blackberries on top. And then a sprinkling of chopped pistachios just inside. And there it is, absolutely stunning. What an elegant dessert. And what an elegant